Hi everyone. Today we're going to go over chapter 15 in your book. It is called Fluoroscopic Imaging on page 216. This should be somewhat of a review from Physics 1. However, we'll quickly go over a little bit of the history. Your first fluoroscope, we attributed it to Thomas Edison. It was made of zinc, cadmium, and sulfide. That was what the screen was composed of. And what they did was they placed the screen over the patient's body in the x-ray beam and moved the screen down the patient's body as the beam was on. The radiologist would then look directly at the screen for the dynamic imaging that he was interested in. If you remember back from Physics 1, our early fluoro equipment required that the radiologist use red goggles for about 30 minutes prior to the exam, basically because the images were very dim. So he had to get his eyes, or she had to get her eyes accustomed to the dim viewing of the images. So as a result, or an improvement that came along in 1950 was the image intensifier. And the purpose of the image intensifier was to make the images brighter while the radiologist was viewing them. All right, so here's the construction of most of our rad fluoro rooms. The only difference for, let's say, if we were talking about our C-arms, because it's actually fluoro as well, is the fact that there is not a table. The table would be the table. Well, I guess there are some C-arm table configurations, but if you're in the OR, of course, you would be using the surgical table. But in our rad fluoro rooms, here's the typical setup that we have in those fluoro rooms. You'll have a fluoro table. Typically, the x-ray tube for the fluoro table is located underneath the table. And if you've ever been in the rad fluoro room, you might notice that those tables do not go up and down. All right, the only thing they do, they are able to flip up to like a 90 degrees, like this, meaning the patient is now standing, and you are also able to flip them down Trendelenburg like this so that the patient's head is down, but you're not able to raise, typically not able to raise and lower those tables up and down in this manner. All right, so again, the x-ray tube is located under the table. All right, on top of the table in the carriage system, you will find your image intensifier. Again, that's above the patient. All right, and the purpose of that image intensifier is to intercept those x-rays that are leaving the patient, that remnant radiation, and actually attempt to make the image brighter for the radiologist to review. The system will also have a recording type system to record the images so that they can be played back later. And you will also have a viewing system, typically a monitor. It can either be on wheels, and some are suspended from the ceiling. The carriage itself, the fluoro tower, we call it in most cases, is power driven. So there's controls on there, and those controls allow the radiologist to use shutters or collimate for the patient's images. Also, he can take, or she can take, images, meaning spot type film. And then she can also move the table and the patient with those same controls that are on that carriage. So they don't necessarily have to depend on our like foot controls or controls that are on the table. It can all be controlled from the carriage. All right, this is the construction of our image intensifier. And again, this should be somewhat of a review from last semester. I believe it was maybe chapter 8, or maybe even a previous chapter. All right, we learned that the purpose of our image intensifier was to create brighter images, or to make those images brighter. So basically, there is a process that the x-rays that leave the patients will go through whenever they enter the image intensifier. All right, and it will hit all 5 of these basic parts, and the parts each have their own purpose, and we'll talk about those in just a second. All right, but again, the image intensifier are basically taking the x-rays or the remnant radiation that is leaving the patient, and it's changing them to the x-rays to light, and then that light is then changed back to electrons, and those electrons are accelerated and turned back into light to create a brighter image. And again, your image intensifier is located inside of your fluoro tower. One thing about our fluoro machines, they typically operate at approximately 2 to 5 MA. All right, so put that in your notes. All right, and the reason why the MA is so low for our fluoro machines is because those patients are there for quite some time. So we use a low MA because we're going to have a lot of time with that patient. So remember, we have MAS. So the second portion will create the time for the patient to be under that live fluoro. So again, that's a way to somewhat, I'll say, reduce or control the patient's doses to use a lower MA station. All right, and here is basically the process as it hits all 5 parts of our image intensifier. So we're going to have the exit radiation or the remnant radiation from the patient intercept at the input phosphor. All right, at the input phosphor is made up of cesium iodide and antimony compounds. Our input phosphors are typically about the input 15 to 30 centimeters or 6 to 12 inches, and our output phosphor is much smaller, typically about 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch. So the output phosphor is a lot smaller. All right, as the exit radiation intercepts at the input phosphor, it will be converted to light. So that's the first phase. We have X-rays being converted to light. All right, next, that light is going to be received by the photocathode. All right, and it is going to convert the light to electrons. Your book has a term in there that you need to be familiar with. Look it up. It's photoemission. So photoemission occurs at our photocathode. All right, next, after it interacts with the photocathode, is converted to electrons, it will be sent to our electrostatic focusing lenses. All right, so they end up in the electrostatic focusing lenses, which it has a negative charge. As we already know, electrons have a negative charge as well. So the focusing lenses will actually, as if you look at the image in your book, it narrows as it goes up towards our output phosphor. Those electrons are funneled up towards the output phosphor. And our output phosphor then will take those and turn them back into light. So it will receive those electrons and turn them back into light to assist in making the patient's image a lot brighter. The output phosphor is composed of zinc cadmium sulfide. All right, now here are some terms. These should be review terms as well. There's 4 terms listed here that I need you to review back again, and these are all associated with math. You have brightness gain, we have magnification gain, conversion factor, and the last term is flux gain. So per your book, brightness gain is an expression of the ability of your image intensifier to convert X-ray energy to light energy and increase the brightness of your image in the process. The next term is flux gain. Per your book definition, flux gain is an expression of the ratio of the number of light photons emitted in the input phosphor and represents the tube's conversion efficiency. All right, the next term is minification gain. Per your book, it is an expression of the degree to which the image is minified or made smaller from the input phosphor to the output phosphor. If you remember back, we said that the input phosphor typically measures 15 to 30 centimeters, and the output phosphor is 2.5 centimeters. So your output phosphor is a whole lot smaller than your input phosphor. And then the last term that you need to review is your conversion factor. It's an expression of the luminance at the output phosphor divided by the input exposure rate. And that term luminance, if we go back to probably chapter 1, we're talking about brightness, or we're talking about the light that's being created. All right, we already talked about conversion factor, but there is your definition for that again. One thing that you need to note is that as with anything in life, as we continue to use it, the performance overall decreases for our image intensifier as the tube ages. So as our tube ages, you'll start to notice that you're going to need more radiation to achieve the same level of brightness than you would have needed when the machine was newer. So that really means that you're going to be using more radiation. So that is going to result in an increase in your patient dose if we have to do that. All right, that's the trade-off there. All right, this should also be a review, automatic brightness control. I think it's a review. It may not be a review for you. But basically, our automatic brightness control is an automated feature for our fluoro tower, and it controls the technique for the radiologist as the exam is in progress. So if you've been in fluoro, if you've had a fluoro rotation already, you'll notice that as the radiologist traverses the fluoro tower up and down the patient's body, you might see that the image will quickly dim for a second. We call that image lag, and then it will brighten back up. Well, different parts of the patient's body will have different body thicknesses. So if I'm going from the patient's neck down to the patient's abdomen, that will need an increase in technique. So that's the job of our ABC. All right, it's going to help compensate for the changes in part thickness. So as we move the tower, it will adjust our technique for us, meaning it might increase the MA and increase the KVP because we went from a thinner part to a thicker part, or it may decrease it because we've gone from a thicker part to a thinner part. So that is the job of our ABC. All right, our fluoro tower allows us to magnify something. So this is with our C-arm too. If you've been in any OR cases, you might notice that you can magnify certain areas of the image. So when we're operating the tube in mag mode, what happens is the voltage to the lenses, the electrostatic lenses, increases. And when it increases, it tightens the diameter of our electron stream, basically where those electrostatic focusing lenses are. It makes that arrow a lot narrower. So now we're focusing more on, I'll say, a more collimated portion than a larger field, or it's really called field of view. All right, when it tightens, it actually shifts our focal point farther away from our output phosphor. All right, so this effect really means that only the electrons that are at the center of our input phosphor are going to be received at our output phosphor. So doing that assists us in magnifying our images. All right, but if we're magnifying an image, of course, the trade-off for that in that particular area, we're going to have increased dose to the patient. And the reason for that is since we have collimated out some of the available x-rays that were available, the machine is going to automatically increase the dose in that area to account for some of those missing x-ray photons. All right, this should also be a review, and we'll go over a little bit of the math. However, our degree of magnification, if we're trying to find what it is, we would divide our full size input phosphor by the selected input phosphor that we're interested in. Typically, machines are going to be trifocus. So let's say it'll be written something like this: 30 by 23 by 15. So we can use a field of view that is 30. We can use a field of view that is 23, or we can use a field of view that is 15. All right, so let's say we have a trifocus image receptor, and we can operate in any of these three modes. When we operate in the 23 centimeter mode, only the electrons from the center of that 23 centimeters of our input phosphor is going to interact with the output phosphor. Those that are around the periphery, so that make up that remaining 30, are going to miss our output phosphor, and they're not going to contribute to our image at all. The same goes if we were operating in 15 centimeter mode. Only the electrons from the center 15 centimeters are going to attribute to image formation. The remaining 30 centimeters, so basically remaining 15 around the periphery, are not going to assist in creating our image. So if we select mag mode for our x-ray machine, automatically it's going to adjust the beam or collimate the beam to match the displayed tissue image, whether it's 23 or 15, and it's going to avoid irradiating tissue that is not in the center of that image, whether it's 23 centimeters or 15 centimeters. All right, one thing you have to note that when we're using mag mode, it is going to increase the patient's dose. Also, mag mode will assist or improve our spatial resolution. So you're going to potentially have less image noise. All right, we're also going to have increased spatial resolution. I'm just going to use the old term, that's detail, increased detail. And last but not least, we're also going to have improved contrast. All right, because we're magnifying that object. As far as spatial resolution is concerned, typically our machines are going to be able to show us up to 6 line pairs per millimeter. All right, and if you remember some chapters ago, that's how we measure our resolution in line pairs per millimeter. All right, I think that is it for this slide. All right, with magnification, and we learned this is a review as well. we learned about types of distortion in the past. When we're talking about types of a distortion, we learned about two types of distortion. We learned about size distortion, and we also learned about shape distortion. All right, of course, magnification is considered to be size distortion because, again, we are magnifying these objects that we need to see. All right, but we can also have shape distortion when we're talking about magnification. That can be an issue as well. All right, some books may call it geometric blurring. All right, some books describe it as blurriness around the penumbra, and then our book also calls it vignetting. All right, so if you ever use your camera feature to vignette your picture, meaning you're kind of like, I'll say blurring the edges or maybe putting some type of light colored mask around the edges, that is what this is showing you. So whenever we're using mag mode, and if you go back to we had a flashlight pencil or pen type activity where we were looking at how SID and OID controls our magnification and our resolution, or how sharp the images were. This is what we're going back to here. So again, magnification will cause some distortion. All right, as far as, I didn't go over this slide yet. So image noise, again, results from insufficient information being present in our images. All right, on our regular x-rays, we identify image noise as those grainy images. So in the past, what we said was, if you have image noise, that means that your technique is not high enough. So our solution for fixing image noise, just like in the past, is going to be increasing your MA. This is what the ABC will do for you in fluoro, but your fluoro images can be noisy. But to fix that, all it will do is increase the technique for that patient so that we have enough exit radiation. All right, and this is the last slide I'm going to go over before I open up our Cloverleaf Learning. This is your viewing and recording system. So with our fluoro, of course, we have to be able to see those images. And of course, whenever the radiologist wants to go and review or read those images, he has to have a way to do so. So when we're viewing our images for fluoro, there is a monitor in the room. It is a closed circuit television feature. We have two fundamental components. We have a camera. Of course, the camera is responsible for recording. And then we also have a monitor. The monitor, of course, the radiologist needs that there in order to view the patient's images real time. Typically, these are light sensitive cameras that are optically coupled because we need to actually take those images and send them to the computer for viewing, or the monitor for viewing. All right, if we're talking about cameras in fluoro, they're typically analog in nature. It can be Vitacon or Plumbicon, some books speak of. You could also have solid state CCDs, or we can have CMOS type technology that's used to relay our output images to our monitor. So there's several things that can be used as far as the camera portion, television portion and camera portion to view these images. All right, I'm going to stop right here. I will pick back up on these, but before I go deeper into the viewing systems where we're talking more about the camera features and also talking about your CCDs, CMOSs, your ADCs, etc., we're gonna go into some of our cloverleaf videos just to give you a visual. All right, so I'll break right here and I'll bring it back to cloverleaf.